Welcome, folks, to another episode of The Wormhole. And I'm really excited today because of who our guest is. It's a person very dear to my heart with all that she does. And it's a real pleasure to have Dr. Claire Nelson on the set with us. Hello, Claire. How are you?
Hello, Dr. Shireen. How you doing? Good to see you. Virtually.
So wonderful to connect with you through the wormhole. My whole idea is that it connects scholars across space and time. So, of course, Dr. Nelson is in the United States right now, and I'm in the Caribbean in Trinidad. So who is Dr. Claire Nelson? Dr. Claire Nelson was the first Jamaican woman to earn a doctorate degree in an engineering discipline, which she pursued at George Washington University in the United States. As a futurist, sustainability engineer, social entrepreneur, and award-winning writer and performance artist, she wears many hats. She has been actively involved in international development for more than 30 years. Her most recent book is Smart Futures for a Flourishing World, a paradigm shift for achieving global sustainability. Dr. Nelson spearheaded the successful campaign to declare June as National Caribbean American Heritage Month in the United States. She's the founder and president of the Institute of Caribbean Studies, and recently, the Institute has launched Ignite Caribbean. Let all ideas contend as a space for gathering emerging thought leaders and intergenerational dialogue on the future of the Caribbean. You can see why it's also dear to my heart. She is also the founder of the Caribbean Space Society, and it is how we were able to connect up. Among her many other accomplishments, Dr. Nelson has been recognized as a White House Champion for Change in 2012 and one of Forbes' 50 female futurists in 2020. Dr. Nelson continues her work today as a chief ideation leader for the Futures Forum, campaign chair for the National Caribbean American Heritage Foundation, and holds positions within multiple future-driven organizations. So a lady of the future. Welcome once again, Claire. So nice to have you on the wormhole with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so although you are all about the future, I like to get started with a little bit of the past. So you are from Jamaica. So tell us a little bit about growing up in Jamaica as a young girl, and what are some of the things? Do you miss anything about living in the Caribbean?
Well, let me start with growing up in the Caribbean. I grew up in what I call very heady days. I was 4 years old when Jamaica raised its flag. And I have very dim memories of this metal mug. There were some aluminum metal, green and gold, little can-looking mugs. They look almost like a condensed can shaped. And it had the imprint of the Jamaica coat of arms on it. And it's a very hazy memory because, I don't remember much of my childhood. But because I think one of those mugs still exists in my mother's, what do we call it, break front or cabinet, glass cabinet.
Yes, very popular.
I go back to Jamaica, I am reminded of that moment that I was around when Jamaica was being born. I was 4 years old. I grew up in a community which was a new housing development for the emerging middle class, and my mother was a teacher. And we unfortunately lived on the school street. I say unfortunately because it became the bane of my existence to be Mrs. Nelson's one daughter who lived on the school street. It means that I grew up in somewhat of a fishbowl because everybody knew who I was. I was just Mrs. Nelson's one daughter.
Okay.
And so, growing up in Jamaica in that era, it is the passing adults without saying greetings. I went to a girls' high school at a time when wearing afros was scandalous. And so I wore an afro when I started high school. So I think I planned to be scandalous from very early. We had a fabulous principal, Mrs. Inez Carnegie, that I think really set the bar for her girls. She was the one that first let us know that we were going to be the leaders. And I was in the Latin class. So even the Latin class was the quote unquote girls that would have to do Latin because we were the ones most likely to become doctors and lawyers. Now add engineers to that. I added engineer when I got to physics and realized I love physics and found it the most exciting subject. And that was when the seed of my becoming an engineer was born. I thought I'd become an electrical engineer. Of course, doctor was always in the back of my mind somewhere, maybe biomedical, but it was a toss-up between those two. Fast forward to my first year at the campus of University of West Indies at Mona campus, and the voice of God, I like to put it, speaks to me and say, no, you got to go. Next thing you know, I've changed my idea of becoming an electrical engineer. I decided to study industrial engineering in order to become, I thought at the time, the first female prime minister of Jamaica. Now, let me say that this was very interesting that I thought those things because through all this time, I am a severe stutterer. So I also grew up as a severe stutterer. But at the same time, despite my being a severe stutterer, I was also a leader. So I don't understand those two things, but somehow I operated in this, like my brain operated on two tracks all the time. One was the person who didn't speak unless spoken to. However, I was also the person that was called upon to stand up in defense of any injustice that was being done to the people in my Sunday school or the young people in the church, young people adult fellowship, or at St. Jude's High School when I wanted to protest some colonial idea which had to be removed from the school. So this is, I think, the formation of who I am. And to some extent, because I'm living that same person, I have not really changed. My formation was with women leaders. My mother was a leader. She was a Girl Scout leader. She was a church leader. She then became the principal of the elementary school. So she very much led the household, right? I knew the limits to which I could not pass. You know, all good Caribbean parents gave you boundaries, right?
Yes.
But I also was given space to experiment. And so because I was creative, I knew that I could speak because I could tell stories without stuttering.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So it really helped to shape my personality. And I'm really grateful that I didn't migrate to America till when I was fully formed. Because perhaps if I had come here at 11, 10, you know, and my mother had chosen to migrate, I'd have been put in the slow class or the retarded class or something, because being a Black female in that era, stuttered, nobody would have known and recognized my intellect for what it was. But I was never stymied intellectually, because at St. Jude's High School for Girls, I was an intellectual thought leader in terms of define colonial education.
This is inspiring, Claire. So the fire and the seeds of passion was always within you for leadership for women.
There.
I have always, as a Caribbean person, I have always been very inspired by what you've achieved, what you've done, and been a voice for the Caribbean and for women as you have. So along that same path, right, I know that citizen participation in government and governance is important to you. And I can tell, as we have already seen, that your heart is in the Caribbean. So what is some of your most cherished work when it comes to citizen participation in government and governance that you want to share with us?
Well, I'm not sure if I'm got my most cherished work yet, but my most cherished to date.
Right.
It's certainly the work I've done in the US on two fronts, and this is why I'm a White House champion of change. On the front of working in international development, because I did not become the Prime Minister of Jamaica. But I don't miss it. And the reason why I don't miss it is because I did not become a regular engineer. I thought I was going to become a regular industrial engineer at the IDB, helping to design projects, etc. However, I ended up working in a place that did not see me. And so because I was put in a place which was oppressive, that childhood fire was awoken. And all the passion I had planned to pour into becoming this prime minister that would have changed Jamaica, etc., became
it's not too late, huh?
The person,
never say never.
One, as long as you're breathing, right? But I thought that this person would become I became the person who became the champion of change in the IDB to transform the development agenda for the voice of people from the global south who look like me. Because in the IDB at that time, they were very hostile to the idea of a Black woman engineer, right? I was literally shushed in meetings or ignored because as usual, I was the only person in the room that looked like me.
Yes.
And so at first, I would say I didn't immediately become this warrior, but you know, when you get pushed and you pushed and you get pushed and you get pushed, and I spent the first couple of years of being pushed. So, okay, since I'm being pushed, I'll just do my PhD. So I went back to school and did my PhD. Then I'm being pushed. Okay, let me just do some more work. I started writing original plays, etc. All this to keep my mind off my misery.
Right.
But I think the last straw was when it turned out that I was doing a play and I got a front cover in a newspaper in Washington, D.C. The play was called Resident Alien. It had been a hit in Jamaica. It ran for 3 months in Jamaica, and somebody produced it in Barbados. So I got this nice coverage. 2 newspapers, 2 community newspapers, not Washington Post, but 2 fairly significant community papers had big write-ups on this play, Resident Alien. And it's like, I don't know if people saw it, because the papers are not like just, small Black newspapers. It's a regular mainstream community newspapers. I get all these attacks coming left, right, and center, people talking to me, insulting me. And it's like, it just, the last straw. And I was called then to recognize that the people were not seeing me. And it wasn't just me. It's that I represented a part of Latin America that was not supposed to be at the table. Right? I didn't pass the brown paper bag test. Right? My skin was too dark. My hair was too kinky, and I refused to straighten it to have good appearance. Right? So I didn't have a good appearance. And worse, I stuttered. So how dare me try to have a voice at the table? But that was when I was given the call to become the voice of the voiceless. And to begin to take up this issue of not just my ability to rise in the organization to be heard, but race as a factor in poverty in Latin America and the Caribbean. And with that, my real self was born, because I recognize now that I never went to the bank in the first place to be a regular engineer.
Right. Yeah, I found that fascinating. I found that fascinating. Yeah.
So I became the person that started to argue for the lending portfolio of the bank to ensure that Black communities in Brazil and Colombia, where there are a large population of the poor, now that the bank had poverty alleviation as its mandate and not just infrastructure development. Right. It was in 1994, I believe, the bank changed this whole mandate. It was no longer just going to be about building roads and so on. It's about poverty. So more education, more health, more policy lending to address these big social inequalities. And that was when I was able to find a champion who was from Chile, and one of my, I would say, only beloved bosses in my 30-year career. Juan Manuel really gave me rope. He gave me a lot of rope, and he championed the project. And that's how the work in the IDB of poverty alleviation in Black communities was born. Without his support, the project would not have been approved.
Wow. So that's where, you see the importance of key people, and even like yourself. I mean, I actually teach at the university, and I was telling my students that with the recently held International Women's Day, that we are so blessed. We stand on the work and the shoulders of women like yourself, Claire, who have made us more visible. And it has been a big fight. And like you said, you are one of the early proponents. Things have improved. They have improved, I think, if you look at over the decades, but we couldn't have been here without your battles. So thank you from me. I appreciate that as I say that. There's so much that I can chat with you about, but I just want to shift a little bit to the book, The Smart Futures for a Flourishing World, which you have recently published. Tell us what it explores.
So Smart Futures for a Flourishing World is my vision for trying to change the conversation on how we get more people to think about sustainability and to design for sustainability. in the middle of COVID, I've had these ideas. I've been talking about smart Caribbean for a long time. And so I've been using these terms. I said, because one day I got mad. I'm like, about smart city, smart this. We have all these light posts and all these traffic control systems, and people still poor and don't have no work because we're not focusing on what really matters, which is the well-being of people.
Yes.
Not technology. That's going to be our God that we will now worship. But people having better lives by using and designing technology so that people can have better lives. I think there's a whole group of people that are so blinded by the shiny, bright lights of technology that they're forgetting technology should service humanity. Right?
Yes, well said. Well said, yes.
So with that, I started to say, well, what if we were smart? Not just the things, right?
Right,
so
yeah.
I realized then if we were smart, we would design differently. So SMART stands for 5 questions. 1, I'm saying that if you're going to design a policy, a program, a plan, a product, a process, policy, you should be able to say, how is this thing going to contribute to sustainability? That's the S.
Right.
Recognizing that everything is a system. Everything is connected to something else. Right? And at the quantum level, as you know, right?
Physics.
This has been proven. It's all entangled, okay?
Yes.
M means that we've got to come off of this Western model of what progress means. We talk a lot of the terms, now even me, I'm guilty of using the word sustainable growth. But growth continues to be the driving rubric of all design. We're just growing. And our growth has become a cancer. We humans are a pox upon the planet. And if we continue to grow without any consideration for sustainability, we become a pox upon the cosmos, right?
Yes, yes.
As infinite as it is, we could become a pox, right?
Yes.
So that's so M stands for what metrics are we using to measure success?
Okay.
How do we define success? So M is the word for metrics, and we want meaningful and morally meaningful metrics.
And that I will imagine, sorry to jump in,
go ahead.
vary for, say, like America or Europe compared to the Caribbean.
Exactly. So the metric, we cannot just say, so for example, the GDP, which we worship and bow down,
right,
it's no longer it should not be the valid and GNP, only the valid thing by which governments in the Caribbean especially make decisions. It has not served us very well, because the IMF then comes in and says to us, do this, chop your butt, but they're not thinking about how does it then impact on this. We're not doing the second and third order impacts of those choices, which comes to the A, which is about the agency. How are we designing so that the agency of the actors in the system, right, and the aspirations of those actors in the system are taken into account? And the actors are not only the actors at the decision-making table, is the ones who are impacted by the choice, and that actor should also include the future generations that will be impacted by that choice.
Right, yes.
The R is a very big engineering question. Resilience. How are you designing for resilience? Because invariably, we think we're invisible. The Titanic could not sink. It did. Yeah. And so let's imagine that all of these fancy, we're going to have government Bitcoin, and soon we'll be coinless and paperless. Yes, until somebody pulls the plug. Has anybody thought about what it means if somebody pulls the plug and the power does not come back on for 48 hours? What are people to do?
And things like that have happened in the Caribbean, even with Puerto Rico, and when they have had their hurricanes, there are regions that have lost power.
So can we truly be totally coinless and powerless? I'm just saying.
Yes. No, very important point that you're raising, because all your smartphone, when it dies, is not going to be there to help you.
So T then becomes transformational use of technology. And it's not just technology for the bright, shiny light of it, but how is technology to be used to transform, to feed back to the word of the metric? So if we have well-being as a metric, right? then
Right.
percentage of technology will mean we are going to do the second and third order impacts of that technology choice through the whole life cycle of that technology choice,
Right.
which means cradle to grave design for the engineering of it, from material use to material decay to material replacement. Those will be designed. So that is basically the framework. And what makes the book exciting for me, after I wrote all the technical parts, I said, but this is like, oh, it's so boring. It's not really, oh, it's not, I don't get it. So I said, no, because I'm not really talking about the soul of what I'm trying to do. So what I did was, I decided to put it in the context of the real COVID thing, because I wrote this in COVID. I had thought about these ideas before, but the book was written in the heart of COVID. And the publisher wanted to do a series of books from authors who had these big challenges that they wanted to make change on and that we're passionate about. So because I want to make change and I'm passionate about this change, I said, well, how am I going to get people to use the word smart? And that's also why I chose the word smart for the acronym.
Yeah.
So my goals are eventually to have something on the phone, like Smart Way. You could have, you could go something keen and remember the 5 questions. That is easy for people, not just in the book. We also want to use the stories that I have put in the book and then begin to collect other stories. And what the stories did for me was put into what I have talked about over the years. Many years ago, I had an opportunity to go to Salzburg seminar to be a faculty member in a topic which was spiritual, ethical, and moral leadership. And because we're becoming so technology bound, we're forgetting that people have spirits. We're not just, the brain is not just a machine. It is more than a machine. It's not just a calculator and a memory bank that is just physically calculating data. There is a thing behind the brain that's doing the mechanics of the chemical things that are doing right? And so, because I believe that, I want to put the soul into my book. So my book opens with a mythological story.
That's the artist in you. That's what I love. It's science and art coming together in your mind. Yeah,
exactly. So what I did was, Anansi's stories are very popular.
Yes, of course.
So I have always, because I practice interfaith, I'm an interfaith practitioner, I wanted to be the same. We now have to be, we have to now create a community of practice that is planetary level consciousness, right? And it's not that we're asking for one global government, but the fact is, if we have an internet and a satellite system that plans the whole planet, we have to have enough people who have planetary consciousness at all times. I'm one of those people, right? And they're more like me and they're out there. But how can we get them quickly to have some tools and some language? So I wrote this story. I wanted to figure out a way to make popular. So what I did was I got all the gods together. You know, like how we have Norse and Chaos and Nyame and Odun and all of these gods together. Yes. And they were having a big conclave that they have every eon or so, right? They have a conclave, right? And so they call the conclave to deal with the human problem because the pandemic offered the opportunity for this pause. So basically, I put the pandemic as is, there is this pause in time for the gods to come together and decide what to do about the human problem. Because the humans are becoming a problem, a pox on the earth. They now have the capacity to clone themselves. They have capacity to self-destruct over and over and over. They have fought so many wars, and they look like they're fitting to now take the wars into space. And this is why the gods had to call a meeting, because it's one thing to have the wars on the planet, but now they're going to have a thing. So Anansi shows up to kind of listen in. And when he hears the conversation, he goes, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job. I'm the chief interlocutor between the gods and humans. No. They cannot destroy humans. I got to save humans so I can save my job. You know, Anansi always has 2 reasons for something. And so he asks the gods for a pause in which he would have the time to go and find stories that demonstrate that humans have the capacity to turn around and change their ways to save themselves and save the planet Earth. And so the gods need not destroy them and start again. So I'm playing on various creation stories, various creation myths that talk about the destruction. The flood myth, for example, of Noah exists in many other ancient things. So people assume it comes from maybe the Ice Age. There's a lot of people speculating, does Atlantis really exist? I don't know. But I know that people's belief in mythology informs all of what we do. All of our current knowledge is packed on top of these ancient spiritual and religious beliefs that drive us at our core, whether we acknowledge it or not. And so I want to start there. So before each of the 7 chapters, I do a story from some time in time. Now, the gods are operating in what I call no time, right?
Yeah.
And then in time, which is where we operate, right? We pick, so Anansi goes out to the year 3000 and he picks a story of hope. He goes to 2100, he goes to 2070, 2050, 2040, 2035, and last 2030. And I picked 2030 because obviously with the global sustainable development goals, we already have agreement that we're trying to get to this. And even though people are saying it's not possible, I believe if enough of us continue to tell stories, not just do the technical work. The technical work is not going to give us the inspiration we need to get the average taxi driver to talk about it the same way. We got to now begin to tell stories. And this is why I use story form. And then I end the book with how Anansi collects these stories. Then he gets Grandmother Spider, which is a Native American figure to assist in collecting the stories they can present to the gods. And there's so many stories that the tree of life can't put them all in the tree of life in time before time's up. And then chaos gets so mad that when he shouts, the lightning crashes the earth and a spring opens up. And that's why hope springs eternal.
Yes, I was looking for hope at the end. Hope is what
that's how the book ends.
I see the storyteller in you. You know, that is an entire novel on its own. I know it's
exactly. So I'm looking for, so I need to animators in Trinidad. We have very big in animation to help me do my animation, animation movie.
I think you definitely need to do that. And, you know, it's just how things work out. The pandemic was the moment, for this book. It was waiting. It was waiting for that. That is just fascinating. I guess I find it very interesting. The scientist in you, the leader in you, and as well as the artist.